What does Christianity have to do with human rights? In fact, if you listen to a lot of people today, they would say that Christianity has absolutely nothing to do with human rights. But the facts differ. Hello, you've tuned in to Global Faith and Freedom, and I'm your host today, Barry Bussey. Join me for the next 30 minutes as we discuss Christianity and human rights. To join us today to talk about this subject, we have Todd McFarland, who's the Associate General Counsel at the General Conference, Seventh-day Adventist. Welcome, Todd.
Thanks for having me.
We have Dr. John Graz from the International Religious Liberty Association. Welcome.
Thank you, Barry.
And also with us today we have Professor John Witte, who's the Director of the Center for Law and Religion at Emory University. Welcome.
Good to be here. Thank you so much.
I'm very much interested in a number of the projects that your center is working on, and in particular, the whole idea, the discussion that has come out in a recent book of yours, dealing with Christianity and human rights. And I'm just wondering if you could help our viewers understand the connection between Christianity in the historical context for human rights.
Well, Christianity, first of all, is one of the sources of human rights in the West. It has many of the basic canonical texts that have been interpreted over the past 2 millennia to institute and put in place human rights norms at the national and international level. Secondly, Christianity has produced many of the great prophets of religious freedom and of broader freedoms for all. Third, Christianity provides in its own infrastructure many of the core ingredients of what a human rights regime needs to survive and to flourish. And Christianity, fourth and finally, provides in its founding member, in its head, Jesus Christ, a wonderful exemplar of human rights advocacy in the rich sense of the term in which we use that historically.
Okay. Now, as we look at the canon, you're referring to, of course, to the Scripture. And where there in the Scripture do we see the whole requirement for us to be respecting of each other?
Well, it lies, first of all, in the basic commandments to love God and love our neighbor as ourselves. That basic commandment provides the foundation for our relationships to God, which are captured in both religious duties and religious rights. It also is the foundation for our understanding of love of neighbor, interaction with our neighbor, the duties we have to our neighbor and the duties our neighbor has to us. Those provide first and foremost the foundation in both the Hebrew Bible and in the New Testament for an understanding of how we live together as religious believers before God and as fellow citizens on this good earth.
Right.
Secondly, we have in the Hebrew Bible an enormous number of basic understandings of rights and protections and liberties for different discrete members of society. The poor, the widow, the orphan, the debtor, members of society that need something and that need protection. The Hebrew Bible and the Old Testament Torah lays out many provisions that are conducive to their protection and provide instruments for their achievement. And then third, in the New Testament, I mean, Christ, St. Paul, and many of the other writers of the epistles extol the concept of liberty. For truth, Christ has set you free. You are free indeed. You have the opportunity to be free citizens. And that Christ provides us with an opportunity to be both free from the strictures of the law in the sense of being held to the punishment that would befall anybody that violates the law of God.
Right.
Christ frees us from that punishment, but Christ also frees us gives us freedom to discharge the duties of the faith. And that's a wonderful gift that every person receives and that Christianity in particular offers to the world. And then that provides one of the foundations for the understanding of rights talk and of liberty talk in the Western tradition from the early church fathers forward.
You know, everyone understood this. I mean, we all had this basic grounding, this basic understanding. John, you've also done some study of history. This is...
Oh, just, I study in the Bible the roots of religious freedom, and that's a very interesting. It starts with the first pages of the Bible with the right to choose, you are free to choose. And it gives the main line, about this concept of freedom to choose. Then you have Moses saying to his people, choose what you want, which way you want to follow. And always, of course, in the Bible, you have the freedom to choose, but at the same time, you have the consequences. But you have the freedom. You make your choice. And, you make your choice, and to make your choice, you have to know the consequences, which is logical. And after, when you go to the gospel, of course, Jesus, he called his disciples. They were not forced to follow him. And during all his ministry, he always asked people, if, you have always a if you want to follow me, do you want to follow me? When he had to face a big crisis in his ministry, and most of the disciples left, he looked at his 12 disciples and he said, do you want to follow me? Do you want to stay with me? That's fabulous. I think that no pressure, no coercion, you have always free to choose to follow or to leave.
Now, as this formed the basis, I mean, as you mentioned about the whole concept of loving God, loving your neighbor, it seems like in many ways we've, at least in the modern society, we have forgotten about the loving God part, or at least the sense of a higher authority, a higher sense of justice. In comparison to, yes, we need to be loving our neighbor when we look at, the human rights foundations, or, the rights talk today. But that element, I'm wondering, just if anyone want to address the idea of the fact that we've, or at least it seems to me that in a lot of our discourse, we've lost this first element, as it were, of God.
Well, certainly historically, the religious freedom rights that we talk about in the Western tradition are the foundation on which civil rights, procedural rights, public rights depend. The anchor of that is historically is in the notion that the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments, provide the foundation for our understanding of human rights. The duty set forth in the first table of the Decalogue, the duty to honor God, to observe the Sabbath day, to be free from false swearing and the like, is the foundation for the second table duties, to honor the life, the liberty, the reputation, the household, the marital relationships of one's neighbor. The two work hand in hand. And the way that the Decalogue is built is first of all about the duties that we owe to God, is in many ways one of the historical templates for the understanding of human rights, starting with religious freedom and then building on that, the rights that we have vis-a-vis our neighbors.
It just, as we move into the 20th century, just as a kind of like jumping there for just a second, it struck me that studying history and so on, that it was the Holocaust that seemed to bring back the concept that, hey, there was a higher sense of justice here, that, the evil was so evil that a greater power, a greater authority, as it were, required us to say, this is wrong. Yeah. And do you agree with that?
That's a question I would like to ask to John Barry. How you explain that Christians who were normally, inspired by the Bible and by the gospel, finally forgot that. They forgot human rights and they forgot religious freedom during centuries and centuries. How can you explain that? How it's happened? Because it can happen again, of course.
Sure. So taking the two questions together, first of all, it certainly was the Holocaust. It was the world staring into Hitler's death camps, into Stalin's gulags, recognizing that we had killed 60 million people in 6 years, recognizing that we had betrayed the fundamentals of humanity altogether. That forced the world to articulate again, what are the foundations on which we can exist together as a people? And in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and other instruments in the 1940s, we began to figure out what are the fundamentals. They are no longer based upon a common faith, but they're based upon a common understanding of human dignity, common understanding of human liberty, common understanding of equality and fraternity. those can be anchored in religious faith. They can be anchored in canonical scriptures. They can be anchored in any number of faith commitments from other people of faith. But those are fundamentals that can't be negotiated.
Right.
And what are the consequences of those? Amongst the consequences are the basic fundamental rights that are articulated in the Universal Declaration and some of the subsequent covenants. The world always has to be reminded of those when it comes into these situations of peril. And historically, this is to get into your question, every time there has been an extraordinary religious war, a pogrom, an inquisition, a form of religious idolatry, the world recognizes that it has come short of ideals that it professes in its own canonical scriptures and which Christ himself held up. And the world comes back to the basics of the scripture, goes back to the sources, goes back to the sacrifices of Christ, goes back to the basic canonical teachings of scripture, and pulls those back before the city-states, before the nation-states, and before the international community as you move forward in time, and reminds them of the necessity for that. Sin, alas, is always there, and sin oftentimes is irresistible, and we've seen the tragedies of that many times.
Okay, good. We will look into this further when we come back right after this. If you're serious about religious freedom, you will want Dr. John Graz's new book, Issues of Faith and Freedom. Dr. Graz has traveled the world advocating the right of individuals to practice their faith. He knows of what he speaks. You've asked these questions many times. Why do Christians defend religious freedom? Should Christians be involved in politics or in interfaith dialogue? Get the answers from a man of experience and knowledge of religious freedom. Supplies are limited, so act now. For only $15 plus shipping and handling, we will send you Issues of Faith and Freedom by Dr. John Graz. To order your copy today, call 805-955-7675 or write Global Faith and Freedom, 101 West Cochran Street, Simi Valley, California, 93065. You can also order online at globalfaithandfreedom.org. Get your copy today. Do you want to be on the cutting edge of what scholars are saying about religious freedom? Then you need to subscribe today to Fides et Libertas. Fides et Libertas is the academic journal of the International Religious Liberty Association. Scholars from around the world have written in this journal on such insightful topics as human dignity and freedom of conscience, faith-based family laws in Western democracies, and equality and non-discrimination. You will not want to miss out on getting your personal copy of this fantastic resource. Be informed. Be enlightened. Subscribe to Fides et Libertas today for just $10 plus shipping and handling. Call 805-955-7675 or write Global Faith and Freedom, 101 West Cochran Street, Simi Valley, California, 93065. You can also order online, globalfaithandfreedom.org. Order now. Welcome back to Global Faith and Freedom, and today we're talking about Christianity and human rights. John, as we were talking during break, it was the question was raised about the whole, in the modern context, the civil rights leaders, and well, at least a lot of folk in the modern struggle for human rights, look at religion, look at Christianity, and say, you know, you guys are the problem, how do we respond to them? How do we address this criticism?
Well, I think, first of all, Christianity has to acknowledge that it oftentimes has not lived up to its ideals. As John Graz was saying before the break, Christianity has had these ideals. Christianity has many exemplars of human rights in the past, but Christianity has also engaged in extraordinary acts of religious warfare, of crusade, of inquisition, of pogrom, of persecution, of belligerence of various forms, which unfortunately are part of our record. Secondly, I would say that Christianity is one of the discoverers of human rights rather than an inventor of human rights. Christianity had the privilege, sometimes under these harsh and cruel conditions of oppression, to begin to realize that human rights are callings, are goods, or gifts of human nature. And Christianity over time developed the vocabulary, developed the institutional structures to put those in place. But Christianity didn't invent human rights. God invented human rights and embedded it in human nature. And Christians over time were able to discover them and to begin to put them in place in serious ways.
So, and what were those structures that allowed for this?
The structures that allowed for
Well, in Christianity, what structures in Christianity then provided the means for the advancement of human rights?
Well, one of the most important sources of human rights in the West, which most people don't talk about, is the medieval canon law, where the church, a universal body that governed all of Western Christendom, had to put in place a functional legal system, had to deal with issues of procedural due process, had to deal with questions of public, private, procedural, and penal rights. And Christianity from the 12th to the 15th century put in place many of what we consider to be the rights, liberties, privileges, and immunities, and the procedural structures alongside to make that real. Those were absorbed into the state law systems of the 16th century forward. They became part of the civil law and the common law, but the church put those in place first and foremost. I think secondly, Christianity also provided much of the initial architecture for thinking about what rights are so fundamental that if breached, they trigger the right to revolution. The revolutionary democratic movements that we have in the 17th through 19th century are living off the capital of that very calculus. What rights are so fundamental that they cannot be trespassed with impunity by a tyrant? And Christians began to articulate that as, well, first and foremost, our rights to religious freedom, our rights to association, our rights to a family, our rights to speech, our rights to press, the rights to organize as a community. Christianity provided that mechanism. And then I think thirdly what Christianity did was to provide an example for other people of faith around the world, to begin to use human rights as a mirror in which to reflect upon their own experiences, their own canons, their own earlier prophets, and to use the modern human rights paradigm as a mechanism for rethinking their own traditions, providing an indigenized hermeneutic, to get fancy, that would allow each religious community to discover within its own canons, within its own traditions, within its own series of great prophets, what are the teachings, what are the practices, what are the norms that are going to be conducive to human rights. Because human rights as a norm, a set of norms, cannot survive without the deep ontological frameworks, without the deep theological and philosophical ideas that religious communities of all sorts bring to bear. You can't simply have an abstract statement of the good life and the good society without having a real understanding of how that is situated in an ethic of restraint and respect, an understanding of fault and responsibility, a mechanism of accountability and love and duty to one's neighbor. Religious communities provide that uniquely, Christianity amongst them.
Now, Todd, you do a lot of work with, the whole, I guess, in the rough and tumble of the legal world, and I mean, you hear a lot of this kind of how would I say, criticism.
Yeah, and John, I guess this is one of the questions. Is, I mean, Christianity has been viewed historically up and through the 1960s, meaning that the U.S. civil rights movement, the black churches provided very much a basis and a structure for that civil rights movement, and it had also provided the structure and the framework for other civil rights movements. But how do we specifically respond when individuals say that that Christianity in particular, and especially in the U.S., is standing in the way of other religious rights, or I shouldn't say civil rights movements? Women's movement, for one, is not one that Christianity, at least evangelical Christianity and Catholicism too, really embraced entirely. How do we respond to those criticisms today?
Well, first of all, Christians and all people of faith have a basic right to exist. They have free exercise rights under the Constitution, and they have a prohibition upon establishing their faith at law. That's built into the constitutional text, and you can't take that away when Christianity and other forms of faith become unfashionable. Secondly, Christianity, while yes, it does provide many of the impediments to the full realization of rights as they are articulated in non-religious societies, Christianity also is a source of an extraordinary number of rights that are critical to the survival of society. Christianity provides what we call second-generation rights in the International Human Rights Framework. Charity, education, health care, opportunities for persons preparing for a vocation. Christianity oftentimes stands at the vanguard of those that are articulating for the rights of the poor and the needy. Christianity also provides great examples of corporate free exercise rights, or the rights of a religious group to organize, to have property, to have educational institutions, charitable institutions that are attached to it. You cannot take from the constitutional and international human rights framework religion as a category, Christianity is an example of that category, and leave much of a human rights structure in place. It is not simply the scaffolding that historically built the human rights paradigm. Religion and religious rights and the unique claims of religious people are part of the fundamental infrastructure of rights talk today. And freedom of religion leads to freedom of speech, press, assembly, association, pilgrimage, education, and the like. Freedom of religious groups leads to the variety of rights that we attach to a corporate organization in society. You can't take that away easily without fraying the entire human rights framework, in my view.
Yeah. Okay. You know, sometimes we forget that Christians and other believers, you know, we are human beings. And, you know, you have to face so much challenges, difficulty, even if you have a beautiful ideal. Now, how you transfer your ideal in the practical way, and you face many challenges, it means that there is a process. It takes some time, more time than we would like. But which is interesting is we have the source, and we have also the way to, you know, the ideal. We have to do something. We have to walk to this way. And even if it is difficult, but sometimes we are not successful too, because we are humans.
Okay, well, when we come back, we will continue our discussion on Christianity and human rights.
In an age of terrorism and increasing war, a new book addresses an age-old conundrum. How does a Christian who follows the command of Jesus to lay down the sword and pray for enemies remain a good citizen when the state calls for war? Should I Fight is a collection of essays that address that very problem. Edited by Barry W. Bussey, the Seventh-day Adventist representative at the United Nations, Should I Fight is a must-have volume for those who want to understand the history of the Seventh-day Adventist position on war and the modern challenges. What emerges clearly from all the essays is that the answer to the question, should I fight, can never be a simple, straightforward yes. Bussey's call to Christians to take a stand on conscience, rather than easily fit in with what society expects or the state wants, is timely and vital, and needs to be heard far and wide among those who acknowledge Jesus as Lord. Order your copy today for just $19.95.
To order your copy today, call 805-955-7675. Inspirational, powerful, entertaining. Audiences everywhere enjoy and benefit from Global Faith and Freedom. And now, for the first time ever, you can obtain the official Global Faith and Freedom DVD set. This dynamic television talk show combines the controversial issues in religion and politics with thoughtful, meaningful discourse from the experts in the field. A talk show on religious freedom has never been better than this. Call now and get 13 unforgettable episodes of Global Faith and Freedom for just $20 plus shipping and handling. You can also sign up to automatically receive future episodes as they become available for the same low price. Precedent-setting Global Faith and Freedom now on DVD. Don't miss this opportunity to bring it home and share with family and friends. Global Faith and Freedom. We bring you the issues of the world. Welcome back to Global Faith and Freedom, and today we're talking about Christianity and human rights. As we've been talking about the historical, the foundational understanding of Christianity and its involvement in human rights, what is the takeaway, Todd? What is it you look at this and you say, hey?
Well, you know, I think one of the fundamental things we have to understand is that Christianity is not the enemy of human rights. It is rather, as Dr. Witte said, a basis for it. And that if you try to take away a group or an individual's right to practice the religion they want, then there really becomes no basis to protect any other right. When you say, well, you can't keep this religious right, you can't hire who you want to, you can't organize how you want, you can't have your membership the way you want, then all of a sudden there becomes no basis when another group becomes unpopular to sort of protect them as well. And I think that's one of the things Christianity has taught us, at least the history of Christianity, is that only protecting sort of the favored group, which isn't always the majority, but some favored group at the risk of a minority group or a least favored group is dangerous. And I think that's something that the secular human rights world can learn from religious history and Christian history in particular.
And in fact, we've got a long history to...
You know, for me, every time I read the Gospel of the New Testament, I am encouraged to practice human rights. You know, to help the poor, to be fair with people, not to be arrogant, and so on and so on. It means the best way to respect human rights is to go back to the word of Jesus, to the Bible, to the heritage of the New Testament. You are stimulated, you know, and if you don't respect human rights, you have a problem, you feel guilty. It's very simple, it's very practical. You know, it's a help, it's a source of inspiration.
All right, John?
I would concur in both those statements. I would say, first of all, human rights give us the freedom to discharge the duties of the faith. And it's an opportunity for us to live the ideals of the gospel, however clumsily, however imperfectly we can. Secondly, I would say it's important to get our history right and to recognize that Christianity is one of the fundamental sources of human rights in the West, one of the discoverers of human rights for the world, and Christianity needs to be part of the conversation about human rights in the future. And third, I would say that Christianity has within its own church structures an opportunity both to exemplify human rights ideals for all, especially in contexts when those human rights are denied around the world. And secondly, Christianity has the privilege through the ministerial offices to make those rights real on the ground, especially for those that are disadvantaged, impoverished, and not given the opportunity in any other context to live them.
Okay. So in essence, it strikes me that what we're saying is, look, we do not have to be intimidated by the criticism that, you know, Christianity is the problem with respect to human rights. In fact, it's quite the opposite. We see a tremendous wealth in our civilization that we need to understand. We need, as you say, get our facts straight, understand our history, what we're about. Any final thoughts?
Yeah, one thing I think we need to keep in remember as Christians is, and we've touched on this before, we haven't always gotten it right, not in the sense of our theology, but in our practice. And the reality is, in history, Christianity has been the basis, or at least a purported basis, for a lot of discrimination and a lot of hardship. I mean, everything from apartheid in South Africa to slavery in the U.S. all had religious roots and pointed to. And so I think we need to really re-examine, as Christians, when people are accusing us of discrimination, like, is this something that we really hold dear and that we have to do, and are we really acting consistently with the Bible?
We can say also we had the experience of society. We wanted to be totally free of Christianity.
Yeah.
You know, some atheist society, the Nazi and so on, and what was the result about human rights? It means sometimes Christians have been the problem, but I think not Christianity. Christianity is really the source of inspiration for human rights.
And I think it would be fair to say that even though the argument would be, okay, in those particular situations, you had this religious argument and so forth, but in essence, we nevertheless had the language, and we nevertheless had the, the canon, the prophets, the infrastructure, and so forth to say, hey, this is wrong. And so we had an ability to be able to deal with that.
Yeah.
Okay, well, gentlemen, thank you very much for a very stimulating discussion dealing with Christianity and human rights. You've been watching Global Faith and Freedom, and make sure you stay tuned to us for next time when we bring you the issues of the world. Hello, my name is Barry Bussey, and I'm one of the hosts here on Global Faith and Freedom. Normally, these chairs are filled with our special guests, but right now, I would like to invite you to come and join me. What do you think of our program? Are there other matters you would like discussed? Perhaps you have a suggestion of how we can do things better. We would like to hear from you. Contact us by using the information on your screen.